So we would like to welcome Mr. Ken Graham. He's the director of the National Hurricane Center. We are so excited to have you, Mr. Graham, in this webinar. The EcoExploratorio Science Museum of Puerto Rico is joining you in celebrating and in the education process of the National Hurricane Preparedness Week. As you know, we are also committed to natural hazard education and preparedness and mitigation, and the National Hurricane Center is very important in all this process. So thank you for agreeing to be with us today.
Wow, that's exciting. It's such an honor to be here, and I can't even describe how a big part of the team that you are, because if you think about it, it takes all of us to be prepared. So to you and your team, and getting that education out, I congratulate you for some great work. Anything that we can do to help. The passion that I have, it's about the science part of it. I get it, but it's about the communication, the social science, and what you all do. That's a last mile. That's what we really have to get that message out. So congratulations, great work, and thank you for being a big part of our team.
Thank you. When this hurricane season arrives, all we can think of is the forecast of the National Hurricane Center. Can you describe, especially for our children, for our students, for our teachers, what is the National Hurricane Center, and what do forecasters do for the mission of the National Hurricane Center?
Yeah, it's an interesting place. We're actually here 24 hours a day. I mean, people ask us, what do you do when there's no hurricane? We're still watching. We're doing the marine forecast for seas and winds and swells. So we're constantly looking at the oceans think about this for a second. It's interesting. From the European coast, African coast, all the way to 140 degrees west near Hawaii. That's our area. That's a lot of ocean to keep an eye on. So the forecasters are issuing the marine forecast. The hurricane specialists, I added it up the other day. I wrote it down here somewhere. 150 years of experience. If you add up all the years that they've been doing this, it's absolutely fascinating. So their job, think about this, take all this model data, take all this science information, turn that into a forecast, a cone, watches and warnings for storm surge, for flooding, for everything, and work so close with the weather forecast in San Juan. Just what a great crew that you all have there. So all that comes together to protect lives. The mission is to protect lives. That's our job. Take the science, communicate it, get the information out so it's actionable, and our goal is to make sure everybody has what they need to protect themselves.
So the brilliant meteorologists that work at the National Hurricane Center, how do they prepare the forecast? What is the process?
So the process is they look at all the models. So the model, there's so many of them. And what this is an important part. People have a tendency to go find their model of choice, the one line or the other line. It hits Puerto Rico, it doesn't hit Puerto Rico. You start looking at all that. Our forecasters take lots of models, and every one of those models, like the GFS or the European, has what's called ensembles, 40, 50, 80 different lines within those models. They study those, they look at them, they blend those together, they come up with the forecast points. They put them together, and then the computers can put together the cone, and then we spring into action about, okay, there's the forecast, but what do people feel? It's the impact, right? What are the winds going to be? How big is the storm? What is the speed of the storm? And we start looking at the storm surge, how much water. Are we going to get water in Puerto Rico in the mountains that can cause landslides and flash flooding? All those conversations start to take place. So they have to piece all that together, and they put that out. And the communication is what most people don't see. It's not just that forecast, it's the briefings, the emergency manager briefings, the elected official briefings, those conversations to say, well, here's the forecast, but you're on the phone saying, here's what we can expect, here's when it's going to begin, here's when it's going to end, here's what you can expect. All those parameters get into the preparedness part, and some of that is not always seen. And so there's a lot to it.
Yeah, the Hurricane Center is like at the top of the mountain, and then all the information flows from there, right?
Exactly. So we put all that together, and then we do our briefings, and then emergency management can say, okay, here's what we think is going to happen, and then those decisions can be made. Anything from sheltering. It's harder on an island, but you can get away from some, at least those low-lying spots that could cause have that flash flooding. But evacuations. All those decisions have to be made from that forecast, and remember, it could change. So the forecast 30 or 40 miles makes a big difference and what you feel on the island, or even in the continental U.S. I mean, just 30 or 40 miles difference can mean the difference between maybe a couple feet of storm surge or maybe 10 and 12 feet of storm surge. That's a wobble. That's just a wiggle, but it makes a big difference on the ground.
Mr. Graham, so many people are looking at the models. I remember when we used, when I used to work at the Weather Service office, you know, most of this information was kind of confidential or for all of us, but then now it's open to the public. Such are the discussions of the National Hurricane Center. Are we building more meteorologists, citizen meteorologists out there, or how do you feel about all these models and all this information available to everyone?
Yeah, I remember in my career, you'd have to get on your computer. I'm looking at my keyboard. You get on the computer and enter in a secret password, and you can see all the different models. Now I pick up my phone. It's all on here. You can find the models. You can do comparisons. I think what I wanted to say really relates back to, you know, there's so much more that we're looking at. I mean, you can always find the single model that hits you or doesn't hit you. And it's interesting. The social science points to that if you're a very positive person, you have a tendency to find the one model that misses Puerto Rico. And if you're not that type, you'll find the one line that hits Puerto Rico. This is important. We're putting those together in our forecast. Historically, you'll like this. It's really interesting. We did a study this year. If you go back in history all the way through the 2019 season, the Hurricane Center forecast beats the models every time. So listen for that forecast. We're really looking at all the models. We're looking at all sorts of parameters within them, and that's how we put together our forecast. So just be careful doing that. You know, hurricane season's stressful enough than to look 10 or 15 days out and find a model that gets you. We're watching it. We're going to be communicating those impacts.
And how does it feel for you, especially with that aspect of social science? You know, you're forecasting a storm, and then all of a sudden it makes landfall, and then it has a huge impact, destroys homes, and then you have deaths. How does that make you feel as director of the Hurricane Center? It happened with Dorian last year. It has happened with Hurricane Maria. Has it made you stronger?
I think it's a constant humbling effect, because, you know, it's interesting that, you know, all the science comes together and it could be a good forecast. The science comes together and we communicate the impacts. Everything from a standpoint of forecasting the storm could be good, but still people lose their lives. And it does impact us. It impacts us because there's never, you don't really, how do I put this? You don't celebrate, you know, that good forecast. We worry about the people that were hurt. We worry about the people that lose their lives. This place is, how do I put this? It's a little, I don't think I've ever told people this, but it's important to know that there's silence here. I mean, after a big hurricane, people walk around here very quiet and everything. There's an impact on us emotionally with these storms. That's how passionate we are about this mission. That's how passionate we are about the science part of it, the social science. We really do care. And everybody here is so passionate and works long hours. And so I guess what I want to say is, yeah, we feel that. When people lose their lives, we really truly feel that. This meteorology, and especially with these hurricanes, is a humbling profession, because, you know, you never feel like you're done until we can prevent all the loss of life.
I understand that, and I feel it, and I feel you. What is the vision now for the future for the Hurricane Center in terms of forecasting for, I mean, more than 5 days? What about the science of modeling or technology? What is the future?
Yeah, so we are really trying to get the forecast further out. We're trying to get a 6 and 7 day forecast point. We're doing it internally, but we're having a little struggle because sometimes we see 1,000-mile error in those 6 and 7 day forecasts. So there's a social science term called anchoring. We're always fearful that people will anchor 6 or 7 days out and say, no problem, it's going to miss us, but something can change. And you go further out, there could be big errors, 1,000-mile error in some cases. So we're trying to figure out how best to portray that day 6 and 7 day forecast. The other part of this, we're trying to get better with intensity. I mean, this intensity, this rapid intensification is something that's so difficult. Dorian, for example, in the earliest stages of Dorian, there were 3 centers. The hurricane hunters were flying. We found 3 centers. Interesting enough, the left center, the terrain of Hispaniola probably would have tore up Dorian. There probably wouldn't have been much left afterwards. In between would have a bigger impact for Puerto Rico, but in fact, it would have been a faster track afterwards and impacted Florida, but the center jumped. There were 3 centers, and eventually it was that right center, it jumped over to the right, and that meant less land interaction. That meant more warm water, longer track, and time for the stall because the steering mechanism, that high pressure, was gone. Think about it. Think about that during that genesis phase. You know, it's not a bad forecast, but which one do you track? The models don't know which center to track. We're trying to do our best to figure it out. Our best forecasts are when the storm is stronger. When they first form, there can always be a lot of error. And I wanted to bring that up because it's just a really important part of this whole equation.
And with every aspect of science, there are also margins of error. And people have to understand that. You know, we might have, or we might think that we might have the best forecast, but it's not usually the case.
Yeah, there's so much error. And if you think about that, especially in the formation phase, I mean, that's when you can have large errors. Little teeny changes can make a big difference. If you think about the cone, a small change makes a big difference down the road. So, you know, in the case of Dorian and the impacts of Puerto Rico, you know, 20 or 30 miles makes such a huge difference in these systems. And that's very difficult to forecast, especially early on. 3 centers. I mean, I see this over and over with storms. It's very difficult to catch it at the very beginning. Once it gets going, once it's established, we have a better track record with those forecasts.
Mr. Graham, last but not least, but we're still recovering from Hurricane Maria even after 3 years. And what is your message to our children, teachers, students, families in Puerto Rico as we head into a probably active hurricane season?
I remember you and I talked about this right after Maria, and you know, coming from Louisiana, going through Katrina, I remember looking at you and looking at some of the kids and having the conversation on that hurricane awareness tour and say, you know, I saw Katrina. It takes a long time to recover, but you will. You will, and you always become stronger after those storms. You become more resilient as a community. So my message is, you know, the basic premise here is we can't prevent the hurricanes. They're going to form. We're going to do our best to let everybody know what those impacts are going to be. Preparedness is everything. It's having that plan. What are you going to do? And remember, and Maria was a big example of that. It's not just the direct impacts, right? The wind and the storm surge, those impacts last a long time. And so the preparedness isn't just for the storm, it's also to be ready for a long time, even after the storm.
Well, this has been an awesome interview. Thank you very much, Mr. Ken Graham, Director of the National Hurricane Center. And it's in Miami, Florida. And we're here in San Juan, Puerto Rico, but we are so happy that this platform allows us to connect in such an easy way, and also to connect with families and making science available to the community. Thank you again, Mr. Graham.
Okay, thank you for what you do. Thank you.